All right, joining us now with more on NATO and the ceasefire, the ongoing military operations in the region, Fox News strategic analyst General Jack Keane is with us. General, always a pleasure to have you. Let me start with NATO. I've been a very strong critic of Europe. I have looked at NATO countries, NATO allied countries. We pay the bulk of monies to defend Europe. Their absence when we're fighting Iran was breathtaking to me, but not shocking. They've neglected national security, national defense. They have embraced socialism and climate alarmism. And maybe the worst thing that they've done is they've had unfettered, illegal immigration without assimilation, resulting in nearly 100 Sharia courts in Great Britain, no-go zones all over the continent of Europe, in France and other places. To me, it is a dying continent. I'm not sure if it's worth going forward with NATO moving as we go on. Thoughts?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that the social democracies that these countries have had for so many years now have really given incredible burdens. They propelled those social democracies forward with entitlement programs at the expense of what? Defense. After the Cold War, they just stopped investing in it, quite frankly, and they became mere shadows of their former selves. Many of those countries, Sean, during the Cold War, had robust militaries with real capabilities, and that just eroded over 2+ decades. And then we have a major threat in Europe with Russia on the march, wanting to take Ukraine and even go further than that, and they don't have the capability to stop them. They needed the United States for sure, and the president has been pounding on them ever since that, up their defense budgets and make real commitments. And we've made some progress there, to be sure. The problem we have here is quite appalling when we ask for their help. And I'm not talking about what they would eventually do in terms of convoy escorts. I've talked to Mark Rutte myself more than once about that. They would get around to doing that. But we're really talking about something more serious than that, and that is denying us bases to use to participate in a war, or even as something as simple as overflying a country's airspace. This is supposed to be an ally, not even speaking of in a formal political and military alliance like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But these are selected countries. This is primarily Italy, Spain, and France, and to some degree the United Kingdom as well. All of the Eastern European countries and the Nordic countries, Sean, they're all in with us. They would give us whatever they have. And I spoke to a couple of those defense ministers themselves. They just don't have much. And as a percentage of GDP, they provide more funding than many of the Western European countries themselves. So I think what the president will do here is certainly he's going to wire brush Mark Rutte, who he has a very good relationship with. They kind of like each other, to be frank about it. And I've got that feedback from both of them. But he's going to wire brush him over how appalling this really is. And I think the relationship with those countries who refuse to help us that I mentioned, that relationship is likely to change as a result of this. I do not think the president will pull out of NATO. I think he understands that there's still value in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They are moving in the right direction, with some exceptions, into increasing their defense budgets and also increasing their capabilities. And it is okay to deal with the countries that clearly let us down so profoundly. But the warning has gone out to NATO to buck up here. And when the United States doesn't, we don't ask for much help, believe me, right? For decades. And when we do ask for help, we're involved in a war here, people shut the door on us. The president had every right to be furious over this, Sean. I think we'll move forward here. There may be some options on the table. I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't decide to move some of our troops out of Western European countries and move them into Eastern Europe countries. I wouldn't be surprised to move our troops completely out of Spain, given, one, they're not doing anything in terms of meeting funding requirements, and two, they stiffed us here. So that is an option the president has. Will remain to be seen, whether he'll take that option. I think we'll likely do something.
All right, let me ask you this. I do applaud the president. There had to be some indication, and the president clearly indicated to the country that there was a strong indication that he was negotiating with a fourth, fifth tier of leadership, and that they wanted a negotiated settlement. Otherwise, I think the president would have followed through on his plan, starting at 8 p.m. last night. But clearly, the president has also been consistent. They can't have a nuclear weapon, and there's no way he's going to allow the Iranians to control the Strait of Hormuz international waterways. That's not going to happen. So, to me, the two main military accomplishments that remain will be to get, as the president affectionately calls it, the dust, and that is the 60% enriched uranium, one, and two, to make sure that they do not try to control the strait. If that's accomplished, is that mission accomplished in your view?
Yeah, I mean, there's more things that we need to do with them, be sure, in terms of restriction, ballistic missiles, in terms of range, and also in terms of numbers. Also, cut off support for the proxies going forward. So those are a couple other things that need to be done. And there's certainly the nuclear enrichment that is there. That is a key factor. But there's other parts of the enterprise. There's 6 points just covering nuclear alone in the 15-point deal. And there's other things that we want them to give up. I think the Libya model that President Bush exercised, where he sent our people in and we took everything out that was nuclear or chemical, in this case, really would serve us well. And likely that is one of the negotiating items here. But listen, Sean, we still have some leverage here. I'm not hiding the fact that I would prefer to continue the military option going forward in our campaign as leverage while negotiations are going on. But that doesn't mean the president doesn't have leverage. He does. 2 weeks, he has a deadline, and he can flat tell them in private, listen, guys, you negotiate with me, and let's get a deal on the points I've got on the table here. You got 2 weeks to do it, or I'm coming back with full throttle, accelerated military option. That's where I'm going to be. You got 2 weeks to get this done. The Iranians will likely want to kick that can down the road. They are masters at negotiating. This is what they really do. They're generational good at it. They obfuscate, delay, and delay is in there is what they want. Why? Extend the ceasefire out a few more weeks, and that puts more pressure on the United States, and particularly the president, whether he'd be willing to go back in after oil prices have come down, political support, and such has increased. That's one of the game plays that Iran has got in mind here. I don't believe the president's going to fall for that at all. You got 2 weeks, put a deal on the table. The second leverage he really has here, Sean, is that if we go back to combat operations and there's no deal, so how are we going to get the nukes out of there? Karg Island. We can threaten taking control of it or take control of it. We have the plans to do it, detailed plans. And once we own it, we tell them we own all of your oil distribution, 90+% of it, 60% of the revenue, 50% of the budget. And we got them by the throat at that point. We need all the nuclear enterprise. We're going to come and take it. If you don't give it, we're going to destroy Karg Island and your nuclear capability. That would force the economic collapse of the regime. I cannot see Iran going there. So we still have significant leverage in front of us to get what we want.
The one thing we know about Donald Trump is that he knows what he wants, he knows his own mind, and all of the things that I mentioned and you mentioned, the ballistic missiles and proxies, definitely will be part of any final agreement. I hope they wise up. I hope they take a negotiated settlement. It would be in everybody's best interest, and then bring our brave men and women home safely. General, appreciate you. Thank you for being with us. And coming up,
be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.